Hello, my name is Kristin Snowden. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, but today the webinar is just educational. It is a question and answer opportunity, and I'm just kind of giving some psychoeducational lecture information. So recently I've been doing kind of a Ode to Brene Brown series. I recently became certified as a Daring Way facilitator, and so I'm sharing all of her really great applicable information with you because it can span, its applications can span from an addict trying to get recovery, a betrayed partner trying to find healing, to just even someone who's doing just fine but wants to find ways to tweak and improve their life, their relationships, everything. So I did some education on what shame is, what shame isn't, what vulnerability is, what vulnerability isn't, how the antidote to shame is empathy and compassion. And that was the most recent one, kind of that it's a practice and you can learn it. Today, I'm going to talk about what gets in the way of vulnerability. So what blocks us and what prevents us from experiencing vulnerability. So what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is kind of the foundation to everything that is the greatest part of life, the greatest parts of life, and also the most painful parts of life. Vulnerability is the act of kind of being all of you, authentically you, and presenting it out to this chaotic, uncertain world and uncertain people where you're exposed to risk and harm all the time. It's very scary. We have very visceral effects in our body when we feel like we're too exposed to harm and pain. But then we also, so we block it, but we also, when we block out the vulnerability to prevent pain and hurt, we also are blocking out real connection, real intimacy with other people, right? We know intimacy is into me, you see, you get to see me, all of me, my good, bad, light, dark. But then it's also, it blunts our joy. It blunts our ability to experience maybe spirituality or faith. It blunts our creativity, right? You have to have vulnerability to think outside the box, to try new things, to push that part of your personality. So I hope if you aren't sure about that, I've done a lot of former videos on that so you can reference. So basically, I always find that one of the most ironic things in my job, I work in addiction and addiction treatment, and I also work with betrayed partners. It's so ironic that basically, you know, you hear Dr. Rob say a million times, addiction is an intimacy disorder, right? I'm not really sure how to meet this need. It's too scary to kind of make myself vulnerable out to this world to see if you can help me get my needs met in this relationship, in this exchange. But I know what I'm going to get from this bottle of Jack Daniels, or I know what I'm going to get from acting out with prostitutes, or I know what I'm going to get from pornography. It's my kind of controlled coping skill to get my needs met instead of making myself vulnerable to the scariness of the world. And obviously there's trauma and attachment issues involved with all of that. And so I find it ironic when I'm sitting there with addicts trying to help them understand how addiction began, how it's been sustained and even progressed and intensified, and then how they find recovery in addiction. One of the most important factors is that they must be vulnerable. They must find connection. They must be with a community. So the thing that drove them most to their addiction is one of their only ways through it. And for betrayed partners or people that are hurt in the relationships, the same irony applies to them, right? So they have been hurt and destroyed by being vulnerable and loving and trusting someone who they thought, you know, was making their relationship a priority, would keep their needs and would keep their family as a priority, be invested in keeping them safe and being honest with them. And all of that, you know, they realize that all of that was not so when they find out about their partner's hidden addiction or other forms of betrayal. Yet, one of the ways to heal from such a devastating act is to slowly and with boundaries and with a trusted group of people learn how to slowly make yourself vulnerable again, learn how to trust to a certain extent. And that is one of the greatest healing opportunities for someone who is struggling with betrayal. So I realize it's a really big ask, but the answer is not to just kind of metaphorically, I've been hurt by people, I'm just going to take my chips off the table and just disengage entirely. That will only pour fuel on the fire and increase your levels of anxiety, depression, distrust, hurt, pain, etc. So let's talk about the ways that we kind of, as Brene Brown would say, armor up from vulnerability, right? We are neurobiologically designed to connect with other people. And wherever there's a strong desire to connect with other people, there's a deep, deep fear that what if I'm not enough? What if there are parts of me that if they saw these parts of me or they learn these parts of me, that they're not going to want any of this? And so we, being the highly adaptive humans that we are, we kind of learn these tricks of the trait to kind of armor up against vulnerability, so we can kind of go out there in this world, in this uncertain world, but try to mitigate risk by armoring up and kind of using these skills. One of the most common ways is what she calls just basically perfectionism, right? So it's this idea that if I get these certain parts of my life right, or just perfect, or always putting out the facade that I got this, like I'm on this one, then I will not have to experience disconnection, hurt, or the pain of vulnerability. So if I perfect, so she uses the word perfect, but it's really, I like the word controlling and manipulation, because that's really what I feel like it is. If I put out this facade that I look the part, I look like I'm intelligent, I look like I'm together, I look like I have my stuff together, I've perfected this, then I won't have to deal with the chaos and uncertainty of people not liking me, or they'll think I got it. If I perfect my children and they get, by these arbitrary measurements, they get these certain grades, they don't get in trouble in school, they get their trophies and awards in whatever they pursue, they get certain, levels of achievement, then I don't have to deal with the pain and vulnerability of maybe my children experiencing rejection or disconnection, or me experiencing rejection or disconnection or judgment for it. If I perfect my job, maybe education, I perfect my marriage, so maybe try to present that everything's fine, or when there appears to be an issue in the marriage, instead of kind of boldly leaning into the discomfort of what's going on, I just get really defensive because I'm not able to own that, we're two imperfect people trying to spend a life together, and it's going to get messy and ugly sometimes. So, because I want to put out a perception that everything is good. So as you can imagine, so we think that perfectionism, or what I call controlling and manipulation, is actually protecting us from hurt and pain. But really what it does is it just increases it, because it hampers achievement. It gets in the way of that process because it's highly correlated with depression, anxiety, addiction, failing, not meeting people's expectations, because it is unattainable. Perfectionism or controlling something or manipulating something outside your own, being is just not possible. And, as we'd say sometimes, it's the definition of insanity. So you can see that it's this kind of mind-numbing, counterintuitive thing that we think it's protecting us from disconnection, but really it's kind of guaranteeing it, because at some point you'll fail. At some point the facade will be pulled up, and you'll still have to deal with that shame and depression, anxiety, and the fears of vulnerability. And so to clarify too, she does a really great job of clarifying healthy striving or striving for excellence versus striving for perfectionism facades, right? Because again, perfectionism is an outward effort to control and manipulate to get a specific outcome. So it's all externally motivated. I want my kids to get, there's a difference between I want my kids to get A's, let's say specifically, because that to me, that means that I'm being a good parent, they're going to have a future that's bright, versus, there's a big effort these days to change language when you're speaking to kids to say, make your best effort. Do you feel like you did hard work? Did you try hard things? Because the idea is that you want to strive for excellence for yourself. So when you put your head on the pillow at night, you can feel like you did your best. So when those shame voices come at you and say, I don't know, Kristin, you're not really that great, or you kind of screwed up here, maybe you're really not worth it. What if your friend knew this about you? You can say, no, I did my best today. I held myself accountable. Now that I know better, I do better in these ways. I've made amends in these ways that I need to make amends. That is as close as you can get to perfection as humanly possible, literally humanly possible, because getting a very specific outcome is not always possible. And so you kind of have to let go of that. There's no way to control the perception of somebody else. So if you're sitting there dressing a certain way, speaking a certain way, asserting a certain characteristic about yourself, there's no way to control how that person's going to perceive you. So that's also just insanity, no matter how much time and energy you put into it. And the ironic thing about perfectionism, or also controlling and manipulation, is when we find that it doesn't work. So if my kid doesn't get that A, 99% of the time, your response to it isn't like, okay, well, then we'll just deal with B's. No, if you're a perfectionist, it's going to be like, you need to work harder to get that A. You need to get up earlier. It's perfectionism when it doesn't work, usually just lights a fire to keep driving down faster and harder to perfectionism. And then the other ironic point to that is that we think that when we're perfect in a certain way, right? We have the right appearance, we're good parents, we have a good marriage, we have a good job, we're successful, whatever. We think that allows us to be worthy of connection. But the ironic thing that any connection that is received, any accolades, any affirmation, any achievement that's received when you are kind of putting up this facade, a controlled, manipulated facade of a certain person, you can't even fully receive it, because the thought is, well, that was just because I was putting up this front. So if a principal comes up to me and goes, oh, your child is, so great, we love her so much, and I'm like, well, if you saw the way that I scream at her at home and I put her down when she gets B's, I don't think that you would think that I'm that great of a parent. Right? Because there's that voice in your head that's like, if you really knew the not so great parts of me, the less desirable parts of me, then you wouldn't like me. And if you remember, our goal here, our ultimate goal, is to own your good, your bad, your light, your dark, all the above, and put it out there to the world to say, yeah, this is the way I've screwed up. These are the not great parts of my life. This is how I've completely blown it. But I also love hard. I show up for people. I'm generous in my interpretation and perspective of people. I am doing my best. So perfectionism is the opposite of that. Another way that we kind of armor up from the vulnerability is what she calls foreboding joy. So what is foreboding joy? It's basically this cultural thing that we do, and it's really interesting because I don't find we talk about it that much. The most common ways are the doomsdayer cynical people, right? Or the ones that say, I'm not, cynical, I'm just a realist. So anytime something good's happening, they are just waiting and preparing for the worst to happen, right? We've had so much good health in our family. Gosh, it's going to really suck when we get those colds and we get knocked out by those colds. The market's been doing so well. Oh, tomorrow it's going to crash, which actually, ironically, it's not doing very well today. But, I got this promotion. How is my life going to go to crap in another category of my life? It's this idea, my favorite way that she explains it is we struggle so much with joy, because joy is essentially like, here's something great that I'm experiencing. I could lose this. And so we can't handle the vulnerability of the joy of like this love or this connection or this achievement. And so we quickly in our brain start dress rehearsing tragedy, because we think that it's going to prepare us to handle when things don't go well, when we do finally lose this precious thing. But really all it does, because anyone will tell you, when you find out that your loved one has 3 months left to live, or that this horrible thing has happened in this world, or you get knocked out from, you find out that your partner's an addict or has been cheating on you, and your marriage is not what you thought it would be. It doesn't matter how much you dress rehearse crisis and tragedy. There's nothing that can fully prepare you for it. So really all that foreboding joy does is just stop you from really taking in and experiencing gratitude for when things are, those moments, tiny moments in life when things do go well. And you rob yourself of that true joy and often the true connection, because it's too much to handle. And when I was reading about this, I was thinking so much about betrayed partners, right? There's so much foreboding joy in the recovery process, because you've been damaged and hurt so much by your partner's betrayal. And so they might be going to meetings or showing signs of changing. And one minute you want to be like, oh my God, is like this person's being honest with me, or they're actually taking their recovery seriously. Or if you're in a new relationship and it seems healthier or more, safe, or different patterns that weren't working for you before, your intuition and instincts, or your gut reaction, I should say, is going to be to forebode joy and not be able to relish in this tiny moment where things seem to be going okay, because your body wants to dress rehearse for another tragedy, for another relapse, for another disappointment. And so she strongly encourages, in her research and study, it's all about practicing gratitude. And she says, it's not an attitude of gratitude. You don't wake up with it. You have to practice it. Keep gratitude journals, share with family about gratitude, speak gratitude to yourself. You could also call it prayer. It's these moments of gratitude where you can certainly caveat it. My partner's in recovery. He's been going to SAA meetings. He's found a sponsor. Wow, that's really awesome that this is happening, that he's taking his recovery seriously. And yes, it could go bad, but I'm processing with my therapist how to set up healthy boundaries around a relapse and how to keep myself safe under all those conditions. So, you're no dum-dum, Kristin. You're gonna figure that out if that happens. But let's relish in the joy of something like this happening, because I never thought this would happen in a million years. So that's kind of taking the moment to practice gratitude instead of pushing away and foreboding the joy. And then lastly, we are all too familiar with the final way that we block out vulnerability. We numb, distract, and ignore our human condition, which is vulnerable and exposed to this world. Again, vulnerability is the birthplace of all that is good in this world. It's the birthplace of connection, love, creativity, faith, being courageous, but it's also the most painful thing in the world when you put yourself out there and you've been hurt and betrayed. So we don't like the pain. In fact, it lights up in our brain as if we've just been stabbed. You know, it's a visceral, horrible pain. And we are a society that wants to push the easy button and just get out of the pain immediately. We want to numb it. We want to run away from it. We want to distract it. And, you know, Brene Brown says, and she makes this point, that our culture is one of the most in debt, addicted, obese, you know, food obsessed, you know, plastic surgery obsessed people in the world, in history. And it's just a product of the fact that pain has become a bad word. Pain is no longer a word that is also something that contributes to us getting stronger, that leads to transcending a difficult moment into a better moment. You know, Glennon Doyle, and I've said this before, she likes to say, look, pain is a professor. Pain will quickly zone in to what is not working. You know, it gets you to that step one faster than anything else in this world. You know, step one's that I'm powerless to this addiction and life's become unmanageable to it. When things are comfortable and things are going great and you're not in pain, you ain't realizing that. You're not realizing that things are working or not working. And so it is absolutely imperative that we do not numb. And one of the things that I work most with my clients is help them realize it's not just about the very socially obvious ways that we numb with the alcohol and drugs, or let's even say sexually acting out. You know, you can numb out to porn, you can numb out to drugs and alcohol, because that will literally alter your chemicals to you know, take the edge off. There's also, obviously, we abuse prescription drugs to take the edge off as well, but we also use other societally appropriate ways of numbing out, overworking, overachieving, restricting food, binging on food, overworking out, doing nothing. So isolating, saying that's fine, I'm out. Like, I'm numbing by completely taking myself out, not communicating, binge watching TV, binge watching your phone, you know, having an affair. That's a way of numbing out to life. It's, I'm going to go into the world of fantasy instead of being in here. There's a lot of fantasy that happens, right? That I want to just be in the fantasy world of what this could be, what this job could be, where I could travel, what my life is going to be in the next 5 years, instead of being in the vulnerability of the present day, in the difficulty and the beauty of this moment. So that's kind of, those are the most common ways that we numb out. And again, it's anything that takes you out of the present moment, the present uncomfortable moments, the present celebratory moments. Who knows what it is? We want to numb joy. We want to numb pain. Both of it is exposing our vulnerability to life. So we want to get rid of it, both of them sometimes. So it's really important. I always encourage clients and their families to explore the ways, their go-to ways of feeling enough. You know, their go-to ways of, when I'm uncomfortable, what do I feel like I need to? One way that, you know, growing up that I've tried to improve on is, if I'm uncomfortable about something, someone shamed me, or I'm in a vulnerable place, I pick the phone up and I would just start talking crap, right? That I feel disempowered. I don't feel like enough, but guess what makes me feel comfortable and numb out is to talk crap about somebody else. So it's really important. It's very nuanced for each person. And it's one of the greatest types of work that you can do, is to kind of figure out the way that you numb out. And also to be specific too, there's a variable, a very hinted variable of what's the difference between relaxing and doing self-care and then numbing out, distracting, avoiding, right? Because the idea of relaxing is not that you are never going to deal with the vulnerability of life. It's not that you're getting out of the present moment. You're just hitting a pause button and you will get back to it. The numbing and distracting and ignoring is like, I'm going to go up into fantasy world and leave this place called reality. Does that make sense? So it's really important that you kind of are always exploring, okay, I want to go shopping, but what do I think I'm going to get from shopping? What do I think I'm going to get from my 90th pair of shoes? Where are you at, Kristin, that you feel like you need this? What is this for? Are you in the right place? And so you fully process it. When you're standing in front of the pantry, why am I in this pantry right now? Am I truly hungry, or am I trying to numb this stuff out? What's the end game here? What are the consequences of this decision? And again, what are all those questions? What's that discussion? It's bringing your feet back to reality, onto the ground, to deal with this moment instead of being into the la la land, the fantasy world of numbing and distracting and ignoring. And that's it.
That's a lot. I've got lots of notes, but I was thinking, you shared a lot about numbing, and I think that there is, like I can take a mental health break, and, if I really, it's not taking out of my schedule, and like it was 110 here, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and I honestly had a couple of hours where there were things I could have done, but I didn't really have to. And so I watched TV, and I binge watched one of the programs that I really like. That was fun, and that was nice. But yes, what I think with numbing is I can't handle the uncomfortable feelings that I'm experiencing. And even if I don't have time, I'm going to go binge watch that program. Right. I'm going to do whatever. There was, you talked about shoes, which I love shoes, but we won't talk about that right now. But there's a really, as soon as you started talking about this, I was like, there's this purse I was having. It was a really uncomfortable thing. It was actually an assessment that I was doing, as part of all this, and it was hitting me in the head with everything. And I got an email from a company, and it was a purse, and like I had to go find this purse. And now I like the purse, but had I not been in that vulnerable emotional state, right, I would not have bought the purse. I've kept that purse and I still use it, but it's one of those things where it's a really good reminder to me that, like I need to check my motives for what I'm doing. And I don't analyze every single thing I do all the time, like every time I'm at the pantry and all that. But I do try to check in with my emotions. And if my emotions are out of kilter, then I need to be a little more hyper vigilant about what my actions are, and my intentionality with it. Yeah, same thing. I could graze through the entire pantry if I, because I'm feeling whatever, but I really appreciated that you talked about, if I'm numbing out all the good stuff too. And I know that like early in recovery, I didn't have tolerance for the good stuff. Like the good stuff frightened me as much as the bad stuff, the difficult emotions. All of the emotions were difficult. And so when you're talking about how, part of recovery is engaging in the vulnerable, which was all the stuff that we avoided, and I've thought before too, I know, and you talked about the visceral reaction, the fear, and like every now and then when I'm in that and I go, what am I afraid of? Like, what is that fear? And fear that someone won't like me, or fear that whatever, but if you really break it down, if I can get my logic in on it instead of just the emotional part and go, okay, am I going to survive, so this person doesn't, whatever. I mean, is this survivable? Yes. Will it feel good? No. But, it's one of those things where, it reduces the fear to a manageable spot if I can, and talking to somebody, not trash talking them, but talking to somebody.
Right. There's a caveat.
Yeah, but if I just talk to somebody and share my, I've had it. I went to a 12-step meeting one time, and it was just like life is a disaster. And within 2 minutes, like she's like, okay, do you have food on the table? And I was like, oh yeah. Oh, wait, I'm okay, and just getting somebody else's perspective when I'm unable to have that perspective. And then I was able to stay in the reality and not have to go chase that. But I do know for myself, when things are, when I'm unsettled, then I'm looking for some way to settle. And I have to be particularly careful that I don't choose something that I ultimately will not feel good about. It's like like, it's okay to go, I'm not feeling good, you know, and I need to do something, but what is that for me? And, you know, if I can choose things that are good for me, obviously, not only do I feel better, but I also am not dealing with the, oh my gosh, I can't believe I ate the entire cake or whatever it is, you know, that I chose to do,
Right.
that in the moment felt good, but, you know, it didn't in the long run. I think when you talked about the pain as a professor too, I've learned so much, you know, and it's been on both sides of that, you know, that, you know, if I'm willing to engage in the pain, like even losing relationships or what, you know, like things that are meaningful to me, you know, I would not trade. I will take the pain because of the connection and the joy and whatever that relationship brought me. So even at the end, if you kind of go, you know, it sucks to lose that person or that relationship or whatever, you know, like the good stuff that came from that was way better. You know, the armor, I was thinking, you know, the armor works both ways too. It's like, you know, it keeps the pain out, or so to speak, but it keeps everything else out too. I thought of the, you know, those chocolate Easter eggs, you know, where they're hollow on the inside. I honestly thought of that. I was like, so yeah, I've got the shell but I'm hollow on the inside, and I'm isolated, and I'm not, you know, I'm not connected to, I'm not full of good stuff either. I'm just hollow. And, you know, that isn't what I ultimately want, you know, for my life or for relationships, you know, either. So I was cracking up when you said, I am not cynical, I'm a realist. I live with one of those, you know, like
Me too.
and like now I go, yeah, I know you're just a realist, and but you know, I truly, you know, I try to find. He said something the other day, and I changed it, and he goes, "You do know how to reframe things," and I said, "Yeah, I mean, I would rather look for, you know, some good or some positive or some way to move forward rather than being the Eeyore, you know, a kind of effect of like, well, it's all going to be bad, you know."
Right.
Because I feel too that for me, I really do appreciate like when things are good and, you know, things are clicking along. I try to take a note of that and have the gratitude and go, gosh, this is so nice, and I'm going to enjoy and appreciate this, because this is one, you know, life is full of the peaks and the
Fleeting.
valleys. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, so I've got this reprieve and I've got this moment of joy that recharges me. So then when the next hard spot comes along, you know, I hopefully have the batteries restored so that I can, you know, engage with that. So, but, you know, I'd rather stand and look at the sunshine and go, ah, rather than going, well, it's going to rain tomorrow. You know, I mean, that's just isn't as helpful for me. So just lots of, you know, and I did think too with the partners of, I mean, if addicts are not inclined to engage and be vulnerable, and, you know, and we want to isolate, but you know, it's got to be so difficult for partners to, you know, kind of dip the toe back in and go, you know, okay, I'm willing to look at this moment, just a snapshot, and go, okay, you know, the person that I love appears to be, you know, doing the things that they need to do for recovery, and I'm just going to acknowledge that in the moment, you know, and be willing to dip my toe a little bit in, you know, the trust that we can, you know, continue on this path. So, you know, trust, you know, has to be very hard to rebuild, and it would be very easy to go, oh, I trusted this person, I was vulnerable with them, they completely betrayed me, so now,
Right.
you know, and now I either can't trust my intuition, I can't trust my gut on who to trust, so therefore I shouldn't trust anybody, you know, there's no one safe. And again, so isolating. So I honor the partners that are going, I'm going to try. I'm just going to try this. So, but
Yeah, and even not necessarily trying with your partner at the time, right? Maybe there's a community, so other betrayed partners. That's why I love the support groups that you guys provide, because that would be someone you'd be more inclined to want to trust, because they know how painful it is, and they can, you know, be more compassionate maybe and more empathetic, and so that feels safer to you.
And that's a great place to start. It's like, okay, I'm willing to trust this, you know,
Right.
but at the end of the day, we're all human and we're all going to make mistakes. And even with my best intentions of never wanting to hurt someone that I care about, or really anybody, I mess up. I do things that, aren't, in alignment with that. And, so someone can perceive that I've hurt them, even if it was unintentional on my part. But if they're in a difficult situation, they may perceive that it was intentional. So it's challenging. And even the betrayed partner groups, I'm sure someone has felt, that wasn't as, yes. So willingness and just being willing to just go, okay, I'm going to keep trying. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more and see where that goes. So, but yeah, really, really, really good topic and challenging to because you can go, well, I want to be vulnerable, but like when you're saying, the visceral reaction, like, yeah, I get, that it's just like, oh no, I'm, what could, bad things could happen, so to understand that, yeah, for me, like I said, I've gotten burned a bunch of times but I'm not willing to change to be, okay, no one's safe. And, I just have to, cocoon up in my, in my own little armor. I'm not willing to do that. I'll take the risks. So, but.
Yeah, not easy, especially at this phase of life when you're recovering from betrayal and hurt from loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the most difficult times to be asking someone to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, yes, particularly when, it's someone's burned them, but then they haven't regained a level of trust so that they're showing that they're trustworthy. So any questions or comments from the group? We'd love to hear. And it doesn't have to be on vulnerability or, the topic that we raised. Open-ended. Kristin is a wealth of information on relationships, and as she shared at the beginning. So any questions that you have, please feel free to put them in the Q&A at the bottom. So if you've experienced where you were willing to be vulnerable, share. We'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah. And while we're waiting for people to comment, I'll add that understanding the way that you armor up from vulnerability and you kind of try to escape shame can be one of the greatest kind of therapeutic interventions for yourself or personal growth interventions for yourself, because the coping skill to manage the exposure, to manage the shame, which is your armor, is usually one of the most obvious things that shows up. So I might be living kind of unconsciously running through life at hyperspeed, and then suddenly I find myself wanting to like devour a bag of Oreos. And that is the most tangible thing in a moment that makes me pause and go, you're not hungry. Why do you want to devour that bag of Oreos? And it's one of the greatest opportunities if you know your stuff, your go-to unhealthy coping skills, the way you armor up, the way you kind of try to help yourself feel good in these crappy moments. Doing those things and knowing those things can make you pause and go, oh, okay, whoa. Let's take a minute to dissect this. I did another series on how to kind of pull apart and better understand and get curious about multiple intense emotions. But I'll tell you, one of the number one ways that you're hooked in some really uncomfortable emotions is when you find yourself armoring up. So that's why this is such an important part of your process. It's usually the first thing that shows up. That means a whole bunch of stuff underneath that needs to get assessed. Okay, so I'm feeling myself being really raging at my kids, or I'm feeling myself really wanting to just pack up my stuff and go, or not answering phone calls, or wanting to just binge on TV and my phone and disconnect. That's a thing that when that's your stuff, it's a great time to hit the pause button and start doing more work, because we know there's so much underneath that.
But I think that's critically important, but I think it's hard to if you're in the moment, it's hard to do that. So it feels to me like, like making a list, Like if I'm intentional, and if I sat down right now and made a list of, if I'm feeling vulnerable, what are some of the things that I would look to do, so that I had that list and I could be a little mindful of that, so that if things are happening, and I go, oh, I'm going for that bag of Oreos, okay, that was on my list, or, but I almost feel like I have to do it when I'm not in it.
Totally.
In order to be able to identify it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you can't be in it and be able to identify it. It's work that's done afterward. So how do I armor up? How do I feel protected? What are what are my go-to ways that make me feel protected in these moments? So,
and some of them, can be healthy. Like if I phone a friend and go, wow, I'm feeling really, I'm feeling very vulnerable right now. And so I kind of feel like even having a list of, here's some not some great choices, and here's some things that would be more, better choices. So that I'm even getting kind of a plan for, if I'm feeling vulnerable, pick from this list instead of that list or something,
mm-hmm. Yeah, just as an example, I had a client who partner had cheated. They were in recovery and they were working on things, but she found she would stop and look at leased homes for rent, and it just kind of became her way of leaving the relationship. So she noticed it was only after arguments that they would have, or things she would notice where she felt like he wasn't making the progress he needed to make, or that she wasn't making the progress she needed to make to heal. And her kind of way of dipping out was to start looking at, okay, I could just rent a house down the street. My kids could still stay in school here. And again, that's not necessarily a bad, unhealthy thing. It was her way of making sense of, okay, if this marriage goes down, how am I going to help myself feel safe? But really what we're just going for is we need to realize that you're not feeling safe right now. Mm-hmm. That is why you're looking at these houses. Mm-hmm. That's why you're kind of losing yourself in this logistical, plan. And you that's cerebral, right? So that's cognitive stuff where you're like, okay, if this marriage doesn't work, I'm going to move down the street. I have this much money. I can get this much in the divorce. My kids will still, right? That's your brain cerebral stuff. And we sometimes feel really safe up there. I know that's me. I feel safe up there. But we have to make sure to be acknowledging everything underneath there. Wow, what was said that made me feel so unsafe? Why do I think that this isn't going to work? Why, what's really going on here? And taking that time to kind of go below the head and explore that as well.
Well, that's really interesting. And I feel like that's I'm going to take control of this. These are some things I can take control of. I can find a place, I can be safe, I can make sure kids are in the same school, For me, I've noticed, if I feel compelled to go clean a kitchen drawer or something like that, I know I've learned, and that to me feels like not a terribly unhealthy one, because gosh, it's the biggest thing, but it was one of those.
Neither of them are.
Yeah. But it was one of those where I went, okay, life is feeling chaotic and I need to go make order of something. Mm-hmm. And I have control over the kitchen drawer. Okay. But I started noticing that was a pattern for me, that if I was feeling, I never feel like dusting, so that it never gets that bad. But if I feel like I need to go make order of something, then I'm going, same thing. I'm going okay, there's chaos going on, and you're trying to, it was just kind of a funny realization that, that was one of the things I do. So
clean. And that would fall in that category of perfectionism, right? Mm-hmm. So this is out of my control, but I can bring control back to this.
Yeah. Well, and with the perfectionism too, I was thinking too of, it has to feel like you're running a marathon and you can't stop, because reality will catch up, and then people will see underneath the veneer, Right. And so it's got to be exhausting just to have, I have to keep, the kids and I've got to keep everybody, only seeing this lovely, facade. But like I said, I just was like, oh my gosh, that would be exhausting, because if you stop, then people will catch up and see behind the curtain, so to speak. So
yeah, It is exhausting from someone who's trying to be in recovery from perfectionism.
Yeah.
From a perfectionist sharing, yes.
Yeah, no, it has to be because there's too many details, and to constantly be making sure everything is lined. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not pretty, or cannot get
No,
pretty
well,
really
I
fast.
was gonna say, but you're acknowledging and working on it, and that's awesome too. And I appreciate your vulnerability and being willing to share. So how's that?
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm there.
Combined, so. But
Does anyone have any questions or comments? Everyone's quiet group today. I wonder if I'm on the right. Hold on. Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to give your
Well,
spiel?
so let me share about so the drop-in groups. We mentioned those a moment ago. With there are betrayed partners. There are ones for addicts. We have other webinars. In fact, a new series or a new adding to this series, shall I say? So on Wednesdays. Again at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, we're completing the month. So Kristin will be here the second Wednesday of the month, but starting in September, we'll have Mark Anthony Lord the first. I've got Eddie Caparucci on the third Wednesday of the month, and he's going to be his will be very couples oriented. I mean, individuals are welcome to, but it's going to be about some information about coupleship. So, and then I've got Troy Love, who will be doing the fourth Wednesday of the month, and I just blanked on what his topic was going to. It was attachment.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
there will be a webinar each Wednesday of the month. If there's a Wednesday with a fifth, we'll see. So don't hold me to that. I don't have a fifth yet, but somebody may be willing to do an extra one, or I may bring in a guest. We'll see. I was just feeling like this was progress, but I just want to let you know that it will be the same Zoom code, and so you'll be able to find that. If you click in, it'll just be a different host each
That's
one.
great.
I think that is helpful because I think it's difficult to remember which week was it and all of that. So I invite you to have a lot more information. So Mark Anthony Lord was doing a webinar series. He was doing that on Thursdays, and then his schedule didn't permit him to continue to do that weekly. So when I invited him to do once a month, he was all in. So his is he's a pastor, Mark Anthony Lord. I thought that was funny.
Right.
He really looks at higher power from a different standpoint. He kind of looks at throw out whatever baggage you brought and, finding a higher power,
Right.
that's meaningful and personal and works for you. So it's good stuff. So yeah. And for those looking for treatment for men with sex addiction, intimacy disorders, or co-occurring sex addiction and chemical dependency, Seeking Integrity Los Angeles is doing great work. So on seekingintegrity.com website, and there's also a workshop. Paul Hartman is doing a couples workshop.
I saw that.
Yeah, so he'll be offering that this weekend, and then again September 20th through 22nd in Los Angeles, in a small group. He's done it for a number of decades. He's great with working with couples like that, and so it's different than going to like this is supplemental to working with a therapist, because if you're there for 15 minutes once a week or whatever, this is can get you a foundation so that you can continue to work with your therapist if you have one. But anyway, so check that out again on seekingintegrity.com. And of course, if you have questions, let us know. Kristin's bio is on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com site. So if you want to reach out to her, you can reach her, and she's got a number of these videos on YouTube. So we hope to continue to have a wealth of information for you and ways to connect. And I appreciate you joining us today. And as always, Kristin, lovely to see you, and thank you for this great information. It's very useful, and I never leave these webinars without learning something that I can apply practically to my life, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. And of course, as always, you can always email me, Kristin Snowden, mft@gmail.com. And my website is Kristin Snowden. It's Kristin Snowden.com. So.
Okay, great. Well, until next month.
Yes. Thank you all. Thanks
Thank
for joining.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.